So, welcome to Green Academy 2023 Taster, which I call 12 and a half Kick-Ass Sustainability Ideas. First of all, to introduce myself, I've been working in sustainability for, well, longer than I care to remember, at least 20 years. Must be getting on for quite a bit longer. That's coming up for 25. I have written 5 books. 3 Secrets: Green Business, Green Executive, Green Jiu-Jitsu, Building a Sustainable Supply Chain, and Accelerating Sustainability During the 80-20 Rule. And you'll see quite a scattering of those books in this taster. The Green Academy sessions I originally based around the contents of the Green Executive, but they have been considerably updated since then. My company is called Terra Infirma Limited. We have 3 main areas of expertise: sustainability strategy, employee engagement, and professional development. And this takes the part of professional development. The top 2, as you'll see if you take part in Green Academy through the whole year, is I see those as 2 sides of the same coin, because there's no point in having strategy if you've got no engagement. And the best way to create a strategy is by involving employees in that process as well. But we will come on to that a bit later on. And there's some icons below showing some of our clients we've had over the years. So this is the taster, as I say, that sort of kicks off the Green Academy each year. And then we have 10 sessions which flesh out some of the issues we're talking about in much more detail. They're usually the first Wednesday of each month, but some of them have to shift around because of public holidays and other commitments that I can't avoid. But more or less the first Wednesday of each month, bar a couple. So on to the 12 and a half kick-ass sustainability ideas. But a little reminder here, first the workbook. This is one of the simpler workbooks we use in Green Academy, but the workbook is really important because it gets you to apply the thinking to your organization. So, most of the webinars I listen to, I start switching off about halfway through. So this keeps your attention, but it keeps you applying the thinking to your circumstance, how you can use it, and then we'll do some assessments of the best ideas for you at the end. Because I don't do this, I certainly don't do it for the money, because it doesn't make a huge amount of money. And I don't do it because I like the sound of my own voice. I want to see you making real change within your organizations. So this bit, to me, is the most important bit of the whole thing. Now, as I'm going through the ideas, I'm not going to stop. Often in the actual sessions, I'll stop and give you time to fill in. But 12 is quite a few ideas to fit into a bit less than an hour. So we'll be going through quite quickly. So you just keep updating this table as we go along. If you've got any questions, if you open the chat, I will keep monitoring that, and then I will pause at a point and pick up the questions. That's generally better than opening the mics and getting all the noise on. And as I said at the start, I do record the sessions. There are quite a few people have said to me they can't make it today, they want to see this. And this one we put out in public. So I just ask that you're very careful what you put in the chat. Don't give away anything that's commercially sensitive. And we have never had anybody put anything in objectionable, but I just ask people to think about what they're going to say, because I don't want anybody taking offense. Okay, I think that's all for the opening palaver. So we will get on with the ideas. Number 1, which was number 1 last year as well, is a can-do attitude. And I think this is really important when you're trying to get people to change, because far too much sustainability communication is, beating a big drum, mark doom. And if you tell people if they don't act, then we're all going to die in a fiery ball of flame, then it's very hard then to say, but we want you to switch off the lights, segregate waste, use more sustainable forms of transport. The message, there's a disconnect between that message of doom and what you're actually asking people to do. So if you go back up again, keep it positive, the green glass half full rather than half empty, we can do this, we can make this happen, you will find that people will respond much more positively than if you speak doom. I sometimes say, you know, the doomsters, it appeals to other doomsters, but everybody else switches off. We've been doing doom since Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring back in the early 60s. It hasn't worked in general, and I find a positive mindset works much better. So that's sort of a cross-cutting one, but it's one that it's about your behavior and your attitude, how you can change things, and it doesn't cost anything. It doesn't take that much effort, just a bit of positive habits. Number 2 is a very simple one. I like to start simple in these ideas and then work up to bigger concepts. Green taxi policy. And I was inspired by this when I went many years ago to the launch of the European Green Capital of the Year in Stockholm. And I noticed at every single taxi in the city was some form of low carbon vehicle. So I asked the people at the event, you know, how did this happen? And they said, pretty much it's because all the businesses in Stockholm will only hire green taxis. So if you have a conventionally powered taxi, then you'll be missing out on business. And it made me realize that if you as one company has a green taxi policy, then what you're doing is not just cutting your carbon footprint, but you're helping make the change that will allow everybody else, including the individual in the ordinary Joe, cut their carbon footprint. Because if I call up from my house to a taxi company and say, I want a green taxi, my spending power, they just go away, we don't have one. You know, I'm just not that significant. But if you're in a major, you know, governmental department or a major services firm, a major manufacturing firm, and you say, we want a green taxi, then they will listen. So you're not only helping your own situation, you're helping for other people as well. Sometimes I call that corporate civic responsibility because it's sort of creating a more sustainable local environment for everybody as well as just yourselves. Number 3 is one that I was umming and ahhing whether to put this one in because it sounds a bit patronizing. But one of the key ways of making sustainable behavior happen is to identify barriers and eliminate them. And I always like this picture because somebody's designed a path and imagines that people will take the long way and people take the shortcut. So you have to sort of make the user experience the shortcut. Sorry, make the shortcut the designed experience so people don't cut across. We call them desire lines if you're doing urban design, but it's very, very true. One of my clients, and it was one of the ones the icons were up before, the logos, they couldn't understand why people weren't using their teleconferencing system. This was long before COVID and everybody started Zooming and working from home. And we found out, we were doing a workshop and somebody went on a bit of a rant about how difficult it was to book the system. And it turned out in order to work out how much money they were saving by teleconferencing, if you wanted to book the system, you had to estimate the cost of the meeting you weren't having. Whereas if you wanted to have a face-to-face meeting, you didn't have to do that. So it was easier to organize a face-to-face meeting than a teleconferencing system. They took that red tape away. And the next thing they had to do was double the capacity of the teleconferencing system because so many people wanted to use it. So we should always be looking to make sustainability as easy as possible. There's a whole raft of people out there who think it's some sort of, you know, that you should hold up hoops for people to jump through. It's some sort of initiation ritual that you should show how dedicated you are to the environment by jumping through all those hoops and making life difficult for yourself. But for the ordinary person, they're looking for things to be nice and simple. So think about how to make sustainability easier than business as usual. Number 4, how to sell sustainability to absolutely anybody. And this goes again about the whole thing of doom, but also just standing up and giving PowerPoint presentations. He said giving a PowerPoint presentation, but it's not a good way to sell sustainability to people who don't already buy into sustainability. So if you're ever in a workshop with me, whether it's online or face-to-face, I will inevitably, unless there's good reason why I can't, I almost always start with the same thing. And that is to ask, why should you or your business, delete as appropriate, take sustainability seriously? And I'll write that across the top of a flip chart, blank flip chart. And then I will stand there and say nothing until somebody speaks. And that pause can take forever. It feels like eons sometimes. But as soon as somebody says, oh, save money or meet legislation or our customers want it, and you write that down, you say anything else, and you keep going until you have filled the flip chart with reasons. And of course, I could put a PowerPoint slide up and gone through those. And actually, session 1 of Green Academy, we do go through the business case in more detail. But it's the process of them thinking it through and selling sustainability to themselves, which is incredibly powerful. You can flip a room full of skeptics into ideologues just by getting them to think this through. Trust me. So I just need to rearrange my windows here a little bit. I've done this I've used this with people in dirty overalls from manufacturing shop floor right up to many times in boardrooms, and I can guarantee you it works. Kind of related to that, because it's extending on, and I said, if you've ever been to a workshop, I spend a lot of time delivering workshops. This actually, Green Academy is one of the few forums where I give PowerPoint presentations, where I tell people what I think, that I sort of do, I'm the expert and here's what you should learn. But in practice, I try and not talk as much as I can. And I involve people, and this goes back to what I said about sustainability strategy. I like to involve key decision makers in whatever strategy or plan we're doing. And this quote is normally attributed to Benjamin Franklin. Like all these quotes, you can find them attributed to all sorts of different people. But tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn. I suppose the workbook is as close as we can get to involving you, in this sort of format, because you are applying that knowledge, so you're thinking it through. But this is based on some simple psychology. Is if you present people with a change, they will tend to exaggerate the downside and play down the upside. If they've had an idea, then the psychology of it flips the other way. So the person who's had the idea tends to exaggerate the benefits and play down the risks. And it's quite a remarkable change when you get it. So it's a bit of an extension of number 4, which is getting them to think through the reasons why. But then whatever change you want them to implement, if you ask them what they would like to do or think you should do, often takes a bit of nudging, a little bit of encouragement in the right direction, all the rest of it, a few suggestions thrown in. But the difference you will get in a room full of people is quite extraordinary. So yeah, as I say, I spend a lot of time, and I do most of my workshops online using Zoom and various tools that I've developed for the online sessions. But before that, it was flip charts, Post-its, all the rest of it. These ladies were waste officers from local authorities, and they're designing an engagement system for a process for people within the local authority area, and different types of households and how they may respond to different messages. But as I say, yes, a lot of my consultancy work is based around workshops, because if they have the ideas, they're far more likely to run with them than if I tell them what to do. This is one that I have learned very recently. I put it in last year's one, but I'm putting it in again because I think it's very, very powerful, is if you are trying to engage a room that is skeptical and cold, again, going back to the psychology of change in meetings and discussions, is whoever speaks first tends to dominate the conversation. So if you can sort of prompt your allies, people who you know are already on board, to say something positive first, then the conversation's unlikely to go negative. Whereas if somebody says something negative first, everybody else tends to chime in alongside the same thing. You'll see this if you ever go around a table, and in a workshop, you shouldn't go around a table and say, right, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? What do you think? And work your way around. Because if Bob's on your left and you go to Bob first, then Sheila, Ali, whoever else afterwards will inevitably say, yes, I agree with Bob, because it stops them thinking something new. So you should never quite go around the table, but if you kind of have to have that open discussion, then if you get one of your allies to say something positive first, particularly if they're quite senior, you will find the conversation much easier than if you just leave it to chance. It's a little bit sneaky, but it works psychology. Everybody will still get their say, so you're not suppressing conversation, but it's just you're trying to get, going back to your can-do attitude and glass half full and all the rest of it, you're trying to get people to engage, you're trying to get people to do stuff. So that initial psychology is very, very important. I've talked a lot about psychology and engagement, and that's because change, when we're trying to implement change, is largely about psychology and engaging people. So as you saw in books, I've developed an idea that I call green jiu-jitsu. And I'm not a martial artist, but you know, in a boxing ring, it's all about trying to bludgeon the other person into submission. Whereas in jiu-jitsu, each opponent will be adjusting their technique depending on the other person. So if the other person's tall, they might use a different technique. If they come at them fast, they may use a technique to use that momentum. If they've got weight, they will use a different technique. It's constantly adapting and actually working almost the strengths, using the strengths of the opponent against them, rather than trying to find a weakness necessarily. So another way of thinking about it is a classic Venn diagram. We all, in our minds, filter out most of the hundreds, if not thousands, of messages that hit us every day. I think somebody worked out that we see somewhere in the region of 300 to 400 advertising messages alone every day. Never mind anything else, you know, whether it's a sign on the door saying push, or you know, a text from a friend saying, do you want to go out on Friday, whatever it might be. So we get bombarded with information. And the way we deal with it is we filter out the stuff that we don't think is important. If you take the assumption that your audience should find sustainability important and just talk about sustainability, you might find you're outside that filter. So what Green Jiu-Jitsu is all about is finding the overlap between the interests of your audience and sustainability. Give you an example, and it's actually the same examples I was talking about the teleconferencing before. That was an engineering company, and we presented sustainability as an engineering problem and challenged the engineers to come up with solutions. And it worked really well. There was one person complained that they weren't paid to develop solutions and they should get a consultancy fee, but there's always one awkward person. We engaged over 1,000 people in workshops doing this, and it was great because we not only got people really fired up, really excited because they'd had all these ideas, we actually ended up with a couple of dozen really good ideas for the company to go away and implement, including the one to do with the teleconferencing that I quoted before. And that was my first experience of Green Jiu-Jitsu's, because I'm an engineer. I did not want to be talking to other engineers about, tree hugging and all the rest of it. I wanted them to engage on their level. So you sort of have to put yourself in the shoes of the audience. In some cases, you might want to segment your audience and have different engagement for other people. So I picked 4 magazines here. New Internationalist, which is very much a sort of green environment, pro-environmental, pro-social justice. Those are the people who already get sustainability. So if you happen to, if you work in environmental charity, that's the tone you might want to take. If you're not, you don't want to take that tone. So it may be the sort of coffee magazine, everything light and airy and fun and all the rest of it. If that's the audience, if you feel that that's the audience that you have. The Economist, obviously, everything's about dollars and cents, pounds, yen, euros, whatever else. If you're dealing with a financial audience, then talk money. One of my clients, the managing director, who was very pro-sustainability, was leaving. The finance director was taking over, and my client said, can you come and see my presentation that I'm going to give him about our sustainability program? When we went through, my first question is, where's the money? Why does it not talk the financial implications of what you're doing and financial opportunities of what you're doing? Because if you've got a guy who spent decades staring at spreadsheets and looking at numbers, they're going to want to see numbers. Likewise, if you have scientists, you can't be light and fluffy because they won't believe anything you tell them unless you give them evidence. And I did a workshop like this for a research council once, and they have to, no matter what statistic they quote to their scientific staff, they had to provide spreadsheets somewhere, because people would do their own sensitivity analysis or regression analysis, whatever statistical analysis they wanted to do, to make sure that they could believe the number. Now, obviously, that's quite a bit different from, in that case, the other staff were sort of estate staff, so security guards and maintenance people, and they had a culture of tell us what to do and we'll do it. So this sustainability manager in that case had 2 different engagement techniques. One was very quantitative with lots of statistics and data, and the other one was just rules-based, just those lights should be switched off. That should, the thermostat should be set to that level, bang, bang, bang. Those staff just wanted to know what the rules were. So she had 2 different segments within her audience. But I think if you look at those different magazines, or look at different magazines next time you're in a shop selling lots of magazines, and think about the different audiences they're all trying to appeal to, because you can see, just even looking from that, good neighbors don't spray you with weed killers, quite different from touching the multiverse, or a wake-up call for democracy, or inflation's back, whatever it might be. Number 8 is close a loop. I used to always use this example for one of my clients, Interface, who, if you haven't heard of, they're worth checking out, the world's biggest carpet tile manufacturer, in my view, probably the best at sustainability in the world. And they have a premium product, which is carpet made out of old fishing nets. But the company that provides them with that material is now providing for many other products as well. So you can buy method products, but the packaging is made from old fishing nets. And you can, my partner bought a swimsuit that was made from old fishing nets, all sourced from the same company. So they're taking a massive problem, a sort of open loop, which is fishing tackle being dumped at sea, which makes up 1/3 of all ocean plastic, and turning it into a raw material. So we talk a lot about the circular economy. Oh, sorry, another slide in there. Another example, we have a company here in the UK which is taking road sweepings and extracting platinum and other precious metals, because the platinum catalytic converter in your car is constantly eroding. So it ends up basically scattered all over the road. And they have found a way of extracting that, because the concentration in the dust is actually higher than it is in the raw platinum ore. So they find it's easier to get the platinum back by processing road sweepings. So you can close all sorts of loops that you don't expect it. But one of the things I like to lecture about this idea of the circular economy is a lot of people interpret it as more recycling, but the circular economy should not be seen so much as a solution to waste as it is a way of sourcing sustainable raw materials. Because as soon as you start seeing it as a waste disposal approach, you will end up with downcycling rather than true recycling. You want to maintain the value in that product. So if you see it as a way of sourcing raw materials, then that attitude will encourage you to maximize the value in the materials and keep it going as long as possible. So you ended up with the infinite loops of carbon, water, and oxygen and nitrogen in the natural environment. And that's what we want to do, because the natural environment is, as far as we're concerned, sustainable. So if you're talking about circular economy, think of it about raw materials, not about waste disposal. Think about raw materials, the waste disposal will look after itself. Hey, how are we getting on time-wise? Well, I think I've been going a little bit fast. I should slow down a little bit. This one is another bugbear of mine. A lot of organizations will put out a sustainability report, which will have huge lists of things they have done over the year. And often when you actually scratch below the surface, you find that their carbon footprint hasn't really changed, for example. So how can you have 20, 30, 40 achievements that you've done in a year and not touch the carbon footprint? Well, it's because of incrementalism. It's an assumption that lots of tiny actions will add up to something big, whereas they don't tend to. And if you think about the 80-20 rule, this is why I wrote the book that I mentioned before, a small number of actions will have a disproportionate effect on what you do, but the vast majority of actions will have a very small effect on what you're trying to achieve. So you need to look at the actions that will make maximum change. So don't think about ticking lots and lots and lots of boxes. It doesn't always add up. We have to be setting ourselves a high bar and then jumping over it. So one of the things, how this works in practice is a lot of organizations will set year-on-year targets. They will say, we need to cut our carbon footprint by 2% or 3% every year. And they think they will get that blue line, but there's only so much tweaking to the system you can do before you start hitting diminishing returns. So you'll get something much closer to the red line in practice. So that's why I recommend stretch targets, where you say, okay, in 10 years, we're going to cut our carbon, 10 years, we might be net zero carbon emissions. We'll talk about net zero in the sessions as well. And, you know, in 5 years, we will have cut our carbon footprint in half. Now that does two things. First of all, it makes you think about big changes, small number of big changes rather than lots and lots of tiny changes. And secondly, it actually gives you breathing space to implement what you need to do to make these big changes. Because if you want to put in capital plant, for example, that isn't going to happen overnight. So you have to actually give yourself time to plan, procure, and implement, commission, all the rest of it in order to realize the targets. Oh, I thought I had another slide there, but I will tell the anecdote anyway because I'm rushing ahead of time. Diageo, international drinks company, one of the biggest in the world, they used to do the incremental approach year on year, and they ran out of incremental things to change. They swapped to stretch targets, and they ended up building 2 enormous anaerobic digesters at 2 of their whiskey distilleries in Scotland, which I doubt it's still the case, but at the time, certainly about 10 years ago, they were the largest renewable energy projects outside the energy sector, so sort of privately owned by a different business. And they were taking, because they could then take the waste material from the distillery process and process it into clean energy, and it would treat the waste material as well, so making it easier to dispose of. And the sustainability manager told me that would never have happened without the swap to stretch targets, because as soon as you go to stretch targets, people start thinking big rather than trying to, there's nothing wrong with trying to improve the system you've got, but you're always going to run up against the limitations of that system. So stretch targets. Okay, 10 is create the future you want, which sounds a bit woo-woo, but there are practical ways of doing this. And we cover this in the second of the main sessions on sustainability strategy. Because what most people do is a form of forecasting. They look at the situation they're in today, and then they project forward the changes they would like to make happen and hope that those add up to sustainability. It's called bending the trend. So sustainability is a rather arbitrary green blob at the bottom of this box here, with environmental impact up in the vertical. So you may have one particular trajectory as business as usual, and then you're trying to implement these different policies, and you hope they match. And again, the issue with this is a bit like the incrementalism, is your mind tends to be locked into what you have already. It's called the tyranny of the present. It's very hard to break free from that. So that's why I use a process that was first put forward by the Natural Step. And I use it all the time. Every sustainability strategy I do uses a form of this, but I don't hear that many other people using it. Most people do forecasting and then just end up with a list of actions that we don't know whether they're going to add up. Whereas backcasting is quite different. It's quite simple, but it's quite different. In backcasting, you start at the end point of what you're trying to achieve. You define that. So you set those stretch targets, and then you create that vision of what sustainability would look like. What would the organization look like if you achieved it? And then you step backwards in time rather than projecting forwards. So I usually do one intermediate stage. So if we've got a 10-year target, where the end point is, then I'll usually step back 5. And the question then is, what would you have to have achieved in 5 years to be on the trajectory to hit the end point? And then you step back to the present day and say, what do we have to start doing right now to meet that intermediate stage, which gets us onto the trajectory to hit the 10-year target? And the difference psychologically that this makes cannot be underestimated. It completely changes the idea. If anything, you sometimes have to rein people in because they get a bit carried away. They'll just assume that all this wonderful technology will be easy. So you have to keep them still on a practical trajectory. But linked to what I was saying about stretch targets, linked to what I was saying about selling sustainability to the people in the room by getting them sell it themselves. This is perfect for workshops. I do it if I'm working with an organization. I try and do it with the boardroom, usually first, but sometimes second. Sometimes I do it with the sustainability team and then do it with the boardroom and then see how the two match up. And then to cascade the strategy down through the organization, you can do the same thing or a simplified version of it at each level you want to go down. So you could go to a particular department, a particular branch of the organization and say, okay, what does this mean to you? How are we going to, what does sustainability look like for this branch if we meet our targets in 2010, and then work back to the present day. And again, that is just a very powerful process to go through. Right, so on to number 11 then. Design. I first got into sustainability through the design door. I was working on an eco-design project for very large made-to-order products, things like oil platforms, ships, process plants, things like that, and trying to find some generic solutions. But it was an interesting place to stay because most people at that time, 25 years ago, were coming in through the sort of ISO 14000 route, which ISO 14001 promotes incremental thinking. It doesn't promote step changes. Whereas once you start looking at design, that's when you're starting to get step changes. And this quote is one of my favorite of recent years. "The world is not broken. It is working exactly how we designed it to," by Mike Monteiro. And what he means by that, of course, is that, human society doesn't happen completely randomly. It happens by lots of people making a lot of choices. The reason why we have climate change is a lot of people have been designing systems, and particularly in the last 35 years, when they've been fully aware of the implications of climate change, that don't address climate change. So unsustainability is poor design. Whether it's design of product, whether it's design of a process, whether it's a design of economic incentives, whatever it might be. So it's a very broad definition of design. And one of my bugbears is Lucozade Sport. I'm not sure if it sells internationally, but I'm sure it's a similar product. It's a recyclable plastic bottle, but it has a film which is also recyclable, but it has a different plastic film wrapped around it. And that means that there's two plastics there instead of one, so it makes the bottle very difficult to recycle. And when it was listed as a recycling Dodo by Recycling UK organization. GlaxoSmithKline, who make Lucozade, said, if anybody can come up with a solution for this, we'd like to hear it. And it's like, well, no, you designed the bottle. You decided to put two different types of plastic together. You can't get away from that. So, you know, they're trying to solve a problem of their own making, whereas they'd be better going back to the design board and fixing it there. And another favorite quote of mine: take the filters out of the pipes and put them where they belong, in the designers' heads. And start that eco-design process. And as I say, it might be a product, it might be a process, it might be government policy. We can design the society we want. And again, this comes back a bit to the backcasting and creating what we want to achieve, rather than feeling that we're somehow sort of being buffeted by the winds of fate. You know, that we've got an awful lot of control if we want it. So the last and one of the most powerful and one of the most difficult things to do is stopping doing stuff. You might have noticed when I went to the intermediate stage on the backcasting, I said, what would we have to have started doing and what would we have to have stopped doing? Because sustainability is as much about stopping doing the bad stuff as starting doing the good stuff. So if somebody says, yes, I cycle, it's eco-friendly, that's great, but it's not going to, if you spend the rest of your time driving a big car, then you're still unsustainable. So it's what you stop doing that really makes a difference. And I mentioned Interface before. They have their sustainability program, was actually just completed a couple of years ago, was Mission Zero, to have zero impact by 2020. And they had a number of carpet products with brominated flame retardants that were never going to be sustainable. So they were profitable, but they don't sell them anymore because they're not sustainable. And that's a really difficult thing to do. It's a litmus test of commitment. And the other thing it does is, if you announce the end of a product or process or supply that you're buying in, whatever it might be, it creates a burning platform for people to innovate, because this forces them to think. It's a bit like, they know they're going to have to let go of the side of the swimming pool and learn to swim at some point, and this is just helps push them in that direction. So it's a very powerful negative. This is just a representation of, if we want sustainability, we don't only need the green growth in the economy and the rise of good stuff, we need the obliteration of bad stuff. Most people take the approach, and there's some truth in it, that green growth will lead to the loss of the brown economy, and it will to a certain extent, but it's much better to take the axe to it and start destroying it, because that will accelerate green growth faster. So there are the 12 ideas, and I will come on to the half one in a minute. Can-do attitude, so no doom, gloom. 2 is that green taxi policy, or you could expand that out to this sort of idea that you do things that won't only work well for your organization, but will help other people cut their carbon footprint too. So there are other examples, but the green taxis is a nice one. I suppose another one would be if you were opening a new site and you worked with the local authority to improve cycle infrastructure to that site. It might improve cycle, it might help people cycle to other buildings and facilities in the same vicinity. But it's that sort of broader thinking. Make it easy. People will take the path of least resistance. So you really want to make the sustainable behavior easier than the unsustainable behavior. Number 4 is get people to sell sustainability to themselves. That is, as a suggestion, that one is gold dust. 5, involve people, which is taking that to the next level, is actually not just going away, writing a strategy and coming back and presenting it to people. If you get them involved in creating the strategy, then they're far more likely to implement it. Get allies to speak first, particularly in difficult situations. Prime people. You don't have to skew the whole thing, but if somebody stands up first and say, I think this is a fantastic idea, but we might need to tweak a few things. It's much better than going, oh, this is awful, everything's gone wrong. 7, use green jiu-jitsu which is working out where that overlap between the interests of your audience and sustainability are. And we do a whole session on that in Green Academy. Number 8, close a loop, circular economy. But remember, it's all about, if you want to make it properly sustainable, it's all about raw materials rather than waste diversion. Waste diversion leads to downcycling. Incrementalism is a new form of greenwash, because you're trying to fool other people and fool yourself that you're actually making a change, whereas really you're messing about around the edges. You need to stretch yourself with stretched targets. Create the future you want using backcasting, very powerful tool. I am constantly surprised that I don't see other people using it as much as I do. I usually have to explain it to people. Some people say, oh, we do something a bit like that, but very few people seem to do it properly. Unsustainability is fundamentally poor design. And because of that, we have the agency to change things. Going back to number 1, our can-do attitude. 12, wield the axe, get rid of the bad stuff. And sometimes it's worth getting rid of the bad stuff before you actually have a proper plan to bring in the new stuff. There's always an excuse to do nothing. So sometimes wielding the axe is necessary to make things happen fast. Right, 12 and a half is to always be learning more stuff. This is the little bit of advert. This is a free webinar, so it's the only one I do advertise our services. Green Academy is our basic entry-level system. I showed you the webinars before. I'll give you a reminder in a second. 10 webinars covering virtually all the topics. Covering all the topics you've seen here today and more, but we go into much more depth and we mess about with backcasting and green jiu-jitsu and all the rest of it, go into much more detail. Mastermind group, which has, this photo was taken of the setup of it when it was face-to-face. We now run it online, and that's a peer-to-peer discussion group. So again, I take the role of facilitator in it rather than telling people what to do. We don't get experts in with PowerPoint presentations. We have a topic and then we talk through them in structured discussions. And we use the Chatham House rule, which means you're allowed to report what was said, but you're not allowed to report who said it or even who was in the room when it was said. So people are speaking with some degree of protection, because we get things said in there that wouldn't make people popular if it was heard back at the ranch. And that's one of the reasons why it's so powerful. And then we also offer one-to-one coaching to help people maximize their skills. So that's why I make it 12 and a half, because it's not a full one. But it's important. You should always be trying to learn new stuff and develop new ideas. So as I say, Green Academy 2023 is there. Going back though to the workbook, before we, so I will actually go back, I think, to the conclusion slide, because that will help you. If you scroll, go on to page 3, there's a simple grid there. So if you've been ranking these ideas against opportunity and risk. And it's up to you how you rank these. We always do these things very sort of quick and dirty. Is your opportunity high, medium, low? Is your risk high, medium, low? If you've been filling that in, then if you put the number of each idea in that grid, in the box that corresponds to those two rankings. So if it was high opportunity, it should be in one of the boxes on the top row. And if it's low in cost, it should be in the right-hand box column. So the best ideas by that little ranking should gravitate towards the top right. And the worst ideas with least opportunity and too much risk should gravitate towards the bottom left. So I have been talking for too long, my throat's a bit sore, so I'm just going to pause and give you a couple of minutes to do that. Right, okay. So that's just a little quick and dirty assessment. But leading on from that, we're going to do our own little mini bit of backcasting. And this is, we do the same exercise at the end of each session. And because I haven't thought of a better way of doing it. But what are the three most important things you've learned today? And even if it's not something I've explicitly said, if it's triggered a thought, triggered a positive idea, list down those. They may be the things in the top right-hand box on that grid. It may be just the three things that are giving you a bit of a buzz from me talking in this time. And once you've done that, I want you to think forward 6 to 12 months and think, what would I be doing differently as a result of that? And then last question is, what three actions will you take first? So these are little tiny steps to get those balls rolling. And it might be request a meeting with so-and-so. It might be Google such and such a thing because I need to know more about that first. What are the three absolute immediate little tiny steps that you need to do to get each of those three things started? So again, we're going from this sort of big amorphous concept down to how it would feel if it was implemented, what would be the impact of that, and then what are the three immediate steps. So that'll be your action plan to take away. And every Green Academy session, we do this process so you get at least 3 actions. If you want to do 5, you can do 5, but you get 3 actions that you can go away and do immediately and start getting some of these ideas into your business. Right, we're coming up on the hour. So, as I say, those are the rest of the sessions starting in a week's time. The business case for sustainability, which we go into much more detail. Everybody says, I understand the business case, but it's important to actually really dig in and understand the implications of sustainability for your business, because then you can be most effective in a strategy. And then most of the other things flow from that. They all run 2 to 3 London time. So we swap from Greenwich Mean Time in a couple of months to British summertime, and then back in the autumn again. And if you'd like to do it, I'll be sending out a special offer alongside the recording of it, with a reduction in price because you've been on this. Okay, we're coming up on 3 o'clock. I am happy to stop here and answer any questions you might have. In the meantime, I will stop the recording and wish you all the best, and I hope to speak to you soon.